The fluorescent lights of Megamart cast their harsh glow across the endless rows of products, creating shadows that danced between the towering shelves. It was a typical Tuesday evening, the kind where working families hurried through after long days at their jobs, grabbing dinner ingredients and household necessities before the store closed. The automatic doors never seemed to stop whooshing open and shut, welcoming a steady stream of customers who moved with the practiced efficiency of people who knew exactly where everything was located. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Behind the customer service counter stood a woman whose presence seemed to command attention without trying. Her name was Maria Santos, and at 34, she had worked retail for over 15 years, climbing from a part-time stockroom position to head cashier supervisor. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite the fatigue that came from standing on her feet for 10-hour shifts, her brown eyes held a warmth that made even the most difficult customers feel heard. Maria had a gift for reading people, for seeing beyond the surface to understand what they truly needed, whether it was help finding an item or simply a moment of human connection. Tonight felt different somehow, though Maria couldn't pinpoint exactly why. Perhaps it was the unusual mix of customers, or maybe the way the evening light filtered through the store's large windows, creating an almost cinematic quality to the mundane grocery shopping experience. She had learned to trust these instincts over the years, recognizing that some shifts held surprises that would stay with her long after she clocked out. The store was moderately busy, not the weekend chaos that left everyone frazzled, but steady enough to keep all registers occupied. Families pushed carts loaded with groceries while teenagers debated snack choices and elderly customers carefully compared prices on their favorite brands. The usual symphony of shopping carts, beeping scanners, and conversations created a familiar backdrop that Maria found oddly comforting after all these years. Near the pharmacy section, a man in his late 40s moved slowly through the aisles, his movements deliberate and thoughtful. His name was David Chen, though no one in the store would recognize him as the founder and CEO of Chen Technologies, a software company that had revolutionized cloud computing and made him one of the youngest billionaires in the country. David had built his fortune from nothing, starting in a garage with nothing but an idea and determination, eventually creating an empire that employed thousands and changed entire industries. But tonight, David looked nothing like the polished executive who graced magazine covers and delivered keynote speeches at tech conferences. His appearance was carefully crafted to blend in, to test something he had been questioning more and more as his wealth grew, whether people's kindness was genuine or simply a response to his status and money. He wore a simple gray hoodie that had seen better days, jeans with a small tear near the knee, and sneakers that looked like they had walked many miles. His usually styled hair was unkempt, and he had deliberately left his expensive watch and designer glasses at home. David's transformation wasn't just about clothing. He had spent weeks preparing for these occasional experiments, studying how to carry himself differently, how to speak with less confidence, how to appear as someone struggling rather than someone who could buy the entire store without checking his bank balance. These tests had become increasingly important to him, especially since his daughter Emma had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition that required constant monitoring and expensive treatments. Emma was everything to David. At 12 years old, she possessed a wisdom beyond her years, partly due to the medical challenges she faced daily. Her condition required her to wear a medical alert bracelet at all times, a constant reminder of how fragile life could be, even when you had unlimited resources. The irony wasn't lost on David that all his money couldn't simply buy his daughter's health, though it certainly helped ensure she received the best possible care. Tonight's test felt particularly meaningful because David had been thinking about the kind of world Emma was growing up in. He wanted to believe that people would show her kindness not because of who her father was, but because of who she was as a person. These experiments in the real world helped him gauge whether that hope was realistic or naive. David selected his items carefully, choosing products that told a story of financial struggle, generic brand pasta, marked-down vegetables that were slightly past their prime, store-brand medications, and the cheapest available options in every category. His total would be modest, the kind of purchase someone might make when counting every dollar. Hidden in his worn wallet was a debit card connected to an account he had specifically set up for these tests, one that he could remotely control to decline transactions when needed. The plan was simple but effective. He would attempt to pay with the card, it would be declined, and then he would observe how people responded. Would they show compassion, indifference, or worse? Over the months, he had encountered the full spectrum of human nature. Some store employees had been understanding and helpful, others dismissive or even cruel. Customers had ranged from sympathetic to openly judgmental. Each experience taught him something about society and about himself. As David made his way toward the front of the store, he passed a woman pushing a cart while holding the hand of a young girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. The child was asking questions about everything she saw, her curiosity boundless despite what appeared to be a medical device attached to her arm. David's heart clenched as he recognized the signs of a child dealing with health challenges, and for a moment, his carefully constructed persona nearly cracked. He thought of Emma, who faced similar struggles with such incredible bravery. The little girl looked up at him and smiled, the kind of pure, uncomplicated smile that only children possess. David managed to smile back, though the emotion caught him off guard. This was exactly why these tests mattered so much to him. Children like this girl, like his Emma, deserved a world where people's first instinct was kindness, not judgment. David approached the checkout lanes, scanning the options before settling on Maria's register. Something about her demeanor suggested she might provide an interesting test case. She appeared professional but not cold, efficient but not rushed. As he got closer, he could see that she wore a small pin on her uniform that read 15 years of service, indicating both experience and dedication. These were often the employees who had seen everything and developed either deep compassion or thick defensive walls. The customer ahead of him was an elderly gentleman purchasing what appeared to be ingredients for a single meal, counting out exact change with the precision of someone for whom every penny mattered. Maria treated him with patience and respect, even helping him organize his receipt and change. When he thanked her, her smile seemed genuine, not the practiced retail smile David had seen countless times in his experiments. This small interaction gave David hope that Maria might pass his test, though he had learned not to predict outcomes. Some of the kindest-seeming people had surprised him with their judgment, while others who appeared indifferent had shown unexpected compassion. Human nature was complex, and these tests constantly reminded him of that truth. As the elderly gentleman left with his groceries, David stepped forward and began placing his carefully selected items on the conveyor belt. Each product was a prop in his performance, designed to reinforce the image of someone struggling financially. The generic pasta, the discount produce, the store-brand painkillers, together they painted a picture of someone making difficult choices between necessity and preference. Maria began scanning his items with practiced efficiency, though David noticed her glance at him briefly. He wondered what she saw, a middle-aged man in worn clothes buying budget groceries, probably trying to stretch every dollar to make ends meet. It was exactly the impression he hoped to create, though playing this role always made him uncomfortable. He thought of his real life, where money was never a concern, where Emma's medical bills were paid without a second thought, where he could afford the best of everything. The irony of his situation wasn't lost on him. Here he was, pretending to struggle financially, when his real struggle was something money couldn't fix. Emma's condition reminded him daily that wealth had its limitations, that some battles couldn't be won with resources alone. Perhaps that's why these tests mattered so much to him. They were a way of exploring a world where people had to rely on each other's kindness rather than financial advantages. As Maria continued scanning, David prepared himself mentally for what was about to happen. He would hand over his card, it would be declined, and then the real test would begin. Would Maria treat him with dignity, or would she assume he was irresponsible or poor? Would other customers judge him, or would someone show unexpected kindness? Each scenario was possible, and David had experienced them all in various forms. The total appeared on the screen, $37.43. A modest amount that represented a carefully planned selection of items. David reached into his wallet with slightly shaking hands, a detail he had learned to add to his performance to suggest nervousness about whether he had enough money. The worn wallet itself was another prop, chosen specifically because it looked like it had belonged to someone for years, someone who couldn't afford to replace everyday items frequently. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maria announced the total with a pleasant voice, and David handed over his debit card. The card looked unremarkable, the kind issued by countless banks to ordinary customers. Nothing about it suggested the massive fortune it was connected to, though of course, that connection could be severed with a simple command from David's phone, which he had already used to ensure the transaction would be declined. As Maria inserted the card into the machine, David felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and anxiety that accompanied these tests. He was about to discover something about human nature, about Maria specifically, and perhaps about the world his daughter would inherit. The machine would beep, display its rejection message, and then David would learn whether kindness or judgment would prevail. The first attempt failed, as David knew it would. The machine displayed its cold, impersonal message: transaction declined. Maria looked at the screen with a slight frown, then back at David with an expression that seemed more concerned than annoyed. This was a good sign, though David had learned not to read too much into initial reactions. "Let me try running it again," Maria said, her voice gentle rather than accusatory. "Sometimes these machines are finicky, especially in the evening." She processed the card a second time, giving David a reassuring smile that suggested she wasn't immediately assuming the worst about his financial situation. David appreciated this small kindness, even as he knew the second attempt would also fail. He had programmed the account to decline all transactions, and Maria's patience wouldn't change that technical reality. But her willingness to try again, to give him the benefit of the doubt, already distinguished her from some of the cashiers he had encountered in previous tests. The second decline produced the same result, and David could see Maria thinking through her options. Some cashiers at this point became impatient or suspicious, assuming the customer was trying to use a card they knew wouldn't work. Others became embarrassed, as if the transaction failure reflected poorly on their abilities. Maria seemed to fall into neither category, instead appearing genuinely concerned about helping David solve the problem. "I'm so sorry," David said, allowing a note of genuine embarrassment to color his voice. "I thought I had enough in that account. Maybe if I try my other card?" He began fumbling through his wallet, creating a moment of tension that would allow him to observe Maria's reaction more closely. This was often the crucial moment in his tests. How would the cashier respond to his apparent financial difficulty? Would they remain professional and patient, or would judgment begin to creep into their demeanor? David had experienced the full range of responses, from sympathetic help to barely concealed contempt, and he could usually tell within seconds which direction things would go. Maria's response surprised him with its warmth. "Don't worry about it," she said, keeping her voice low enough that other customers couldn't easily overhear. "Take your time. These things happen to everyone." Her tone suggested she had personally experienced similar moments, that she understood the embarrassment and stress of financial uncertainty. As David continued his performance of searching for another form of payment, he noticed Maria discreetly glancing toward the growing line behind him. A few customers were beginning to show signs of impatience, checking their phones and shifting their weight from foot to foot. This created additional pressure for Maria to resolve the situation quickly, another layer to the test David hadn't specifically planned but that made the scenario more realistic. The customer directly behind David was a woman in an expensive business suit, her cart filled with organic produce and premium brands. She tapped her foot rhythmically and made no effort to hide her irritation at the delay. Behind her stood a teenage boy with his mother, both looking tired and eager to get home. The contrast between David's modest purchase and the items in the carts behind him was stark, another detail that might influence how people perceived the situation. "Sir," Maria said quietly, "why don't you step aside for just a moment while you figure out your payment? I can help these other customers and then come back to you." Her suggestion was practical and considerate, offering David a way to save face while not penalizing the other shoppers for his apparent difficulty. This response impressed David because it balanced compassion with efficiency. Maria was treating him with dignity while also managing the needs of other customers. It was exactly the kind of problem-solving that demonstrated emotional intelligence and professional skill. He was beginning to think that Maria might pass his test with flying colors. As David stepped to the side, still playing his role of someone struggling with financial embarrassment, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. Maria was wearing a small medical alert bracelet, similar to the one Emma wore every day. The sight of it transported him instantly back to the hospital room where Emma had received her diagnosis, where doctors had explained the necessity of constant monitoring and medical identification. The bracelet was partially hidden by Maria's uniform sleeve, but David's trained eye caught it immediately. He knew what such bracelets meant: someone with a serious medical condition, someone who understood vulnerability and uncertainty in ways that went far beyond financial struggles. This detail changed everything about how he saw Maria and potentially about how she might see him. Suddenly, David's test felt different. He was no longer simply observing how someone treated a stranger in financial difficulty. He was watching someone who likely understood what it meant to face challenges beyond your control, someone who knew that life could change in an instant regardless of your plans or preparations. This realization made him want to abandon his performance and reveal the truth, though he knew that would defeat the purpose of the experiment. Maria continued helping the impatient businesswoman, maintaining her professional demeanor even as the customer made passive-aggressive comments about people who shop beyond their means. David watched Maria's reaction carefully, noting how her jaw tightened slightly at the unkind words but how she continued providing excellent service nonetheless. The teenage boy and his mother were much more understanding, even offering encouraging smiles in David's direction. The mother whispered something to her son that David couldn't hear, but their body language suggested she was using the moment as a teaching opportunity about compassion and patience. These small acts of kindness from strangers reminded David why he conducted these tests, to find evidence that empathy still existed in the world. As the line continued moving, David pretended to search through his wallet more frantically, adding layers to his performance while actually observing the dynamics around him. Other customers were now aware of his situation, some showing sympathy while others displayed varying degrees of judgment or indifference. The store had become a microcosm of society, revealing the full spectrum of human nature in response to someone else's apparent misfortune. Maria finished with the businesswoman and turned back to David with a patient smile. "Any luck with that other card?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. There was no judgment in her voice, only genuine concern for helping him resolve the situation. This was the moment David had been building toward throughout his carefully orchestrated performance. How Maria handled his continued inability to pay would reveal the kind of person she truly was, beyond her professional obligations and training. He was about to discover whether her kindness was genuine or simply good customer service. "I'm really sorry," David said, allowing genuine emotion to enter his voice as he thought about Emma and all the real struggles they faced together. "I thought I had enough, but with all the medical expenses lately." He let the sentence trail off, providing just enough information to suggest why his finances might be strained without giving specific details. The mention of medical expenses was partly truthful. Emma's condition did require significant ongoing costs, though money was never actually a concern for their family. But David had learned that this detail often triggered different responses from people, sometimes revealing deeper layers of empathy or judgment depending on their own experiences with healthcare challenges. Maria's reaction was immediate and telling. Her eyes softened with understanding, and David saw her glance down at her own medical bracelet before looking back at his face. In that moment, a connection formed between them that went beyond the customer-cashier relationship. She saw something in his story that resonated with her own experience, and David could tell that his test was about to reveal something profound about human compassion. "Medical expenses can be overwhelming," Maria said softly, her voice carrying the weight of personal knowledge. "I understand completely." Her response confirmed David's suspicion that she spoke from experience, that the medical bracelet represented her own journey through health challenges and their associated costs. The store around them continued its evening rhythm, but for David and Maria, the moment had become something more significant than a simple transaction. They were two people connecting over shared understanding of life's uncertainties, though only one of them knew the full truth of the situation. David realized that his test was evolving beyond what he had planned. He had expected to observe Maria's response to financial difficulty, but instead he was witnessing something deeper: how someone with their own challenges responded to another person's apparent struggle. The medical bracelet had created a bridge between them, a shared understanding that transcended the artificial scenario he had created. As he continued his performance, David found himself genuinely moved by Maria's kindness. Her response wasn't just professional courtesy or even general compassion, it was the specific understanding that came from someone who had walked a similar path. This was exactly the kind of person he hoped Emma would encounter in her life, someone who would see beyond surface circumstances to recognize shared human experiences. The test was far from over, and David knew that the most revealing moments often came under pressure. How would Maria handle the situation as it continued to unfold? Would her initial compassion sustain itself, or would practical concerns eventually override her empathy? These questions would determine whether she truly passed the test David had designed, though he was already beginning to suspect that she represented the best of humanity he had been searching for. The silence between them stretched for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only seconds. Maria's eyes held a depth of understanding that made David's chest tighten with an emotion he hadn't expected to feel during this experiment. Her medical bracelet caught the fluorescent light as she moved her hand, and David found himself thinking about all the nights he had sat beside Emma's hospital bed, watching similar medical devices monitor her condition while she slept. "You know what," Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper, "let me see if I can help you figure this out." She glanced around the store, noting that her supervisor was currently dealing with a situation at the customer service desk, before turning back to David with renewed determination. Sometimes the card readers have trouble with certain banks, especially the smaller credit unions. Have you tried using it as a credit transaction instead of debit? David felt a pang of guilt at Maria's genuine desire to help him solve a problem that was entirely fabricated. Her suggestion was logical and showed both technical knowledge and a willingness to go beyond the minimum requirements of her job. He had encountered many cashiers who would have simply shrugged and moved on to the next customer by now, but Maria was actively trying to find a solution. "I could try that," David replied, maintaining his role while internally wrestling with the deception. He handed her the card again, knowing full well that it would fail regardless of how she processed it. The account was programmed to decline all transactions, but he had to continue the performance to see where Maria's kindness would ultimately lead. As Maria attempted to run the card as credit, David noticed that the line behind him had grown longer. The evening rush was beginning, with people stopping by after work to grab dinner ingredients or household necessities. Some customers checked their phones impatiently, while others seemed more understanding of the delay. A few had even struck up conversations with each other, turning the wait into an opportunity for human connection. The businesswoman who had been behind him earlier had moved to another register, clearly unwilling to wait any longer. David watched her at the adjacent checkout line, where she was now complaining loudly to that cashier about people who waste everyone's time. Her attitude served as a stark contrast to Maria's patience and understanding, highlighting the different ways people responded to inconvenience. "I'm sorry," Maria said as the credit transaction also failed, "but it looks like there might be an issue with the card itself or with your account. Do you have a phone number where you could call your bank? Sometimes they put holds on accounts for unusual activity." Her suggestion was another example of her genuine desire to help. Many cashiers would have given up by now, but Maria was still trying to find ways to resolve the situation. David realized that she was treating him exactly as he would want someone to treat Emma if she were ever in a similar position, with dignity, patience, and creative problem-solving. "I don't have a phone," David lied, patting his pockets as if searching for one. This was another layer to his test, removing the most obvious solution and seeing how Maria would respond to someone who lacked even basic resources that most people took for granted. "I've been meaning to get it turned back on, but with all the medical bills." He let his voice trail off again, providing just enough context to explain his apparent circumstances. Maria's expression shifted to one of deeper concern. She understood all too well how medical expenses could force people to make difficult choices about which bills to pay first. Her own experience with healthcare costs had taught her that luxuries like cell phone service were often the first things to go when medical bills started piling up. "That's tough," she said, and David could hear the genuine empathy in her voice. "Medical bills can really overwhelm everything else, can't they?" She glanced down at her own bracelet unconsciously, a gesture that spoke volumes about her personal experience with the healthcare system. The connection between them deepened in that moment. Two people, both affected by medical challenges in different ways, finding common ground over shared understanding of how health issues could complicate every aspect of life. David felt a strange mix of satisfaction that his test was revealing Maria's true character and guilt that he was manipulating someone who clearly understood real struggle. "Listen," Maria said, lowering her voice and glancing around to make sure her supervisor wasn't watching, "I have an idea. Why don't you pick out just a few of the most essential items from your cart, and I'll see if my employee discount can help cover some of the cost. It's not much, but maybe it would bring the total down to something more manageable." David felt his breath catch. Maria was offering to use her own employee benefits to help a complete stranger, someone she had known for less than 10 minutes. This wasn't just good customer service or professional courtesy, this was personal generosity from someone who likely struggled with her own finances, given her comment about understanding medical expenses. "I couldn't ask you to do that," David replied, though his voice cracked slightly with genuine emotion. He was witnessing exactly the kind of selfless kindness he had hoped existed but rarely found in his previous tests. Maria was proving that compassion wasn't dead, that there were still people willing to sacrifice for others without expecting anything in return. "You're not asking," Maria said with a gentle smile, "I'm offering. I know how it feels to stand at a register worrying about whether you can afford what you need. If I can help make that feeling go away for someone else, even a little bit, then that's what I want to do." Her words carried the weight of lived experience. David could tell that Maria had stood in similar checkout lines, probably more recently than she would care to admit, calculating and recalculating totals, hoping her card wouldn't be declined, making difficult choices between necessities. The fact that she was willing to extend her employee discount to help him suggested a level of empathy that went far beyond ordinary human kindness. David looked down at his cart, pretending to consider which items were most essential while actually marveling at what he was witnessing. The generic pasta, marked-down vegetables, store-brand medications, all chosen to reinforce his fictional financial struggle, now represented something different. They were symbols of Maria's willingness to help, tokens of human kindness that she was trying to make more accessible through her own small sacrifice. "The medications are probably the most important," David said, selecting the store-brand pain relievers he had chosen as props. "Everything else I can probably do without for now." He was curious to see how far Maria's generosity would extend, whether she would maintain her offer when faced with the practical reality of implementation. "Absolutely," Maria agreed immediately. "Medicine should always come first. What about some of the food items? You need to eat, too." She began looking through his cart with the focused attention of someone trying to optimize a limited budget, exactly the kind of skill that came from personal experience with financial constraints. The teenage boy and his mother, still waiting in line behind David, had been quietly observing the entire interaction. The mother whispered something to her son, and David saw the boy nod seriously. They seemed to be using the situation as a teaching moment about compassion and helping others, which gave David hope about the next generation's capacity for empathy. "Ma'am," the teenage boy said suddenly, addressing Maria directly, "my mom and I were wondering if we could help too. We could add some of his items to our bill if that would make things easier." The offer came from nowhere, catching both David and Maria by surprise. A complete stranger, probably no more than 16 years old, was volunteering his family's money to help someone he had never met before. The gesture was so unexpected and pure that David felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. Maria looked equally moved by the boy's offer. "That's incredibly kind of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "What's your name?" "Marcus," the boy replied, stepping forward slightly. "And this is my mom, Janet. We've been watching what's happening, and we just thought, well, we've been in tough spots before, and people helped us. Maybe it's our turn to help someone else." Janet nodded, placing a supportive hand on her son's shoulder. Marcus is right. We remember what it was like when his father was sick and we were struggling to pay for everything. Strangers helped us then, and it made all the difference. If we can do the same for someone else now, we should. David was witnessing something extraordinary. Not only was Maria showing incredible kindness, but her example was inspiring others to act generously as well. The boy and his mother were offering to help not because David seemed deserving or because they expected anything in return, but because they understood from experience how much such help could mean to someone in need. I don't know what to say, David managed, his voice genuinely shaky with emotion. This response wasn't part of his performance, it was real reaction to the unexpected kindness he was receiving from multiple strangers. You don't even know me. That's exactly why it matters, Marcus replied with wisdom beyond his years. Anyone can be nice to people they know. But helping strangers, that's when you know you're doing the right thing. Maria wiped at her eyes, clearly affected by the boy's words and the generosity being displayed. You know what? Let's all work together on this. Marcus and Janet, if you're willing to help with some of the food items, I can use my discount on the medications. Between all of us, we can make sure this gentleman gets what he needs. The collaborative spirit that emerged was unlike anything David had experienced in his previous tests. He had witnessed individual acts of kindness before, but never this kind of spontaneous group effort to help a stranger. It was as if Maria's initial compassion had created a ripple effect, inspiring others to contribute their own acts of generosity. Other customers in line had been listening to the conversation, and now some of them began speaking up as well. An elderly woman offered to contribute a few dollars, saying it reminded her of times during the Great Depression when neighbors helped each other through difficult periods. A young couple volunteered to pay for David's vegetables, explaining that they grew their own garden and understood the importance of fresh food when money was tight. David found himself at the center of an impromptu community effort, with strangers pooling their resources to help someone they believed was struggling. The artificial scenario he had created had become real in ways he never anticipated. These people weren't just being kind to him, they were demonstrating the kind of mutual support that made communities strong and resilient. This is incredible, Maria said, coordinating the various offers of help with the skill of someone accustomed to managing complex situations. Let me figure out the best way to process all of this so everyone gets properly credited. She began dividing David's items into groups, determining which customer would pay for which items and how her employee discount could be applied most effectively. As Maria worked, David noticed that her medical bracelet kept catching his attention. He wondered what condition it represented, what challenges she faced in her own life that gave her such deep empathy for others' struggles. The bracelet was clearly well worn, suggesting it had been part of her life for some time, and the way she unconsciously adjusted it while concentrating indicated it was as natural to her as breathing. Have you been dealing with medical issues for long? David asked quietly while Maria organized his items, genuine curiosity overriding his planned script. The question was more personal than he had intended, but the extraordinary kindness he was receiving made him want to understand the person behind it. Maria paused in her work and looked at him with surprise, as if she hadn't expected him to notice her bracelet. A few years now, she replied carefully. Diabetes, actually. It's manageable, but it requires constant attention and regular medical care. The costs can add up quickly, especially when you're trying to afford all the testing supplies and medications. Her admission explained so much about her behavior. Maria understood medical expenses not as an abstract concept but as a daily reality that affected every financial decision. She knew what it meant to budget for medication, to worry about insurance coverage, to make difficult choices between health needs and other necessities. This personal experience was the foundation of her empathy for David's apparent situation. "I'm sorry you have to deal with that," David said, and he meant it sincerely. Even though his own daughter's medical challenges were different, he recognized the universal stress that came with managing chronic health conditions. It's not fair that staying healthy should be so expensive. No, it's not, Maria agreed, but you learn to adapt. And you learn to appreciate the kindness of others when they help you through difficult times. That's why this, she gestured to the group effort forming around David's groceries, is so important. We all need help sometimes. The processing of David's items became a careful choreography, with Maria directing the collaborative payment like a conductor leading an orchestra. Marcus and his mother handled the food items, the elderly woman covered the cost of the generic pasta, the young couple paid for the vegetables, and Maria applied her employee discount to the medications. Each transaction was processed separately but with the shared goal of ensuring David could leave the store with everything he needed. David watched this coordination with amazement. He had designed his test to reveal individual character, but instead he was witnessing collective compassion. Maria's initial kindness had created a domino effect, inspiring others to contribute their own acts of generosity. It was a powerful reminder that kindness could be contagious, spreading from person to person and creating something larger than the sum of its parts. "There we go," Maria announced as she completed the final transaction. "Everything is paid for, and you should have all your essentials covered." She began bagging the items carefully, treating each one as if it were precious cargo rather than simple grocery items. "I can't believe this is happening," David said, and his amazement was completely genuine. "You've all been so incredibly kind to a complete stranger. How can I ever repay this?" "You don't repay it," Marcus said firmly. "You pass it forward. When you're in a position to help someone else someday, you remember this moment and you help them. That's how kindness works." The wisdom in the teenager's words struck David profoundly. Marcus understood intuitively what many adults seem to forget, that kindness wasn't a transaction to be balanced but a gift to be shared freely and continuously. The boy's perspective reminded David of his own daughter, who often displayed similar insights despite her young age and medical challenges. As Maria finished bagging the last items, David noticed that several other customers had been watching the entire interaction with obvious approval. Some were smiling, others had tears in their eyes, and a few were whispering to their companions about what they had just witnessed. The collaborative kindness had affected not just the direct participants but everyone who observed it. "Here you go," Maria said, handing David his bags with a warm smile. "Take care of yourself, okay? And remember what Marcus said about passing it forward. The world needs more people who are willing to help others." David accepted the bags, feeling their weight not just physically but emotionally. Each item represented someone's generosity, someone's decision to help a stranger without expecting anything in return. The medications that Maria had discounted, the food that Marcus and his family had purchased, the vegetables that the young couple had covered, all of it was evidence of humanity at its best. "Thank you," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "All of you. This means more than you could possibly know." He looked around at the group of people who had come together to help him, memorizing their faces and trying to capture the feeling of this moment so he could carry it with him always. As David prepared to leave, he noticed that the collaborative spirit was continuing even after his situation was resolved. The elderly woman was chatting with Marcus and his mother about community volunteering opportunities. The young couple was exchanging contact information with Maria, apparently interested in learning more about diabetes awareness. What had started as an effort to help one stranger was evolving into broader connections between community members. "Wait," Maria called out as David started to walk away. "I know this might seem forward, but would you like me to write down some information about local food banks and assistance programs? They might be able to help you stretch your budget further while you're dealing with medical expenses." Her offer was another example of thinking beyond the immediate situation. Maria wasn't content to just solve David's current problem, she wanted to provide resources that might help with ongoing challenges. It was the kind of comprehensive caring that came from someone who understood the long-term nature of financial and medical struggles. "That would be very helpful," David replied, accepting the piece of paper she offered. The information was written in neat handwriting and included phone numbers, addresses, and notes about which programs were most helpful for different situations. Maria had clearly taken time to research and compile this information, probably for other customers who had found themselves in similar circumstances. As David finally began walking toward the store exit, he reflected on what he had just experienced. His test had been designed to measure individual character, but it had revealed something much more significant: the power of kindness to inspire more kindness, to build community, and to restore faith in humanity. Maria's initial compassion had created a ripple effect that touched multiple lives and strengthened connections between strangers. The weight of the bags in his hands reminded David of the responsibility he now carried. These items weren't just groceries purchased through deception, they were symbols of trust, generosity, and hope from people who believed they were helping someone in genuine need. The fact that his need was fabricated didn't diminish the sincerity of their giving or the impact of their kindness. Outside the store, David sat in his modest rental car for several minutes before starting the engine. The evening air was cool, and the parking lot was busy with shoppers coming and going, each absorbed in their own routines and concerns. But David felt transformed by what he had experienced inside Megamart. The test he had designed to evaluate others had ended up revealing something profound about the capacity for human goodness. He thought about Maria, still inside the store, probably helping the next customer with the same patience and care she had shown him. Her medical bracelet was a reminder that she faced her own daily challenges, yet she had been willing to use her employee discount to help a stranger. Her kindness wasn't born from abundance but from understanding, from personal experience with difficulty that made her empathetic to others' struggles. Marcus and his mother had also stayed with David in his thoughts. The teenager's wisdom about passing kindness forward was exactly the lesson David hoped to teach his own daughter. The boy understood intuitively that helping others wasn't about personal benefit but about contributing to a better world for everyone. The elderly woman, the young couple, and the other customers who had contributed or simply supported the collaborative effort were all part of something special. They had proven that community still existed, that strangers could come together to help one another without expecting recognition or reward. David's phone buzzed with a text message from his assistant, reminding him about a board meeting scheduled for the following morning. The message was a jarring reminder of his real life, his actual circumstances, and the wealth that made problems like grocery bills irrelevant. But instead of feeling relieved to return to his privileged reality, David felt a sense of loss. The connection he had experienced with Maria and the others felt more real and meaningful than many of the interactions in his billionaire world. He started the car and began driving home, but his mind remained focused on the evening's events. The test was technically complete, he had gathered the data he sought about human nature and kindness. But the experience had raised new questions about authenticity, community, and responsibility. Maria and the others had given him something genuine, even though his circumstances were fake. What did he owe them in return? The drive to his mansion took him through several different neighborhoods, each representing different economic realities. He passed modest apartment complexes where people like Maria might live, working multiple jobs to pay for medical expenses and basic necessities. He drove by middle-class suburbs where families like Marcus and his mother navigated the balance between helping others and managing their own financial pressures. Each community reminded him that his test had touched real lives with real struggles. At a red light, David found himself staring at a pharmacy sign, its bright cross illuminated against the evening sky. He thought about all the people inside, probably picking up medications they could barely afford, managing chronic conditions with limited resources, making difficult choices between health and financial stability. Maria was part of this world, and her kindness tonight had come from that reality rather than from abstract charity. When David finally arrived home, the contrast was overwhelming. His estate sat on several acres, surrounded by security systems and landscaped grounds. The house itself was a monument to success, filled with art, technology, and luxuries that most people could never imagine affording. But tonight, it felt hollow compared to the genuine human connection he had experienced in the grocery store. Inside, he found Emma in the family room, working on homework while medical monitoring equipment hummed quietly in the background. Her medical bracelet was visible on her wrist, similar to Maria's but representing different challenges and supported by unlimited resources. Seeing his daughter reminded David why these tests mattered. He wanted to understand the world she would inherit and the people she would encounter. "How's your evening, Dad?" Emma asked, looking up from her textbook with the bright smile that never failed to warm his heart. Despite her medical challenges, she maintained an optimistic outlook that often put David's own concerns in perspective. "It was enlightening," David replied, sitting down beside her. "I met some really remarkable people tonight. People who reminded me that kindness still exists in the world." Emma nodded seriously, as if she understood the weight of that statement. "That's good. Sometimes I worry that everyone is just pretending to be nice because of who you are. It's better when kindness is real." Her observation was perceptive, capturing exactly why David conducted these tests. Emma had grown up surrounded by people who treated her family differently because of their wealth, and she had learned to question whether interactions were genuine or motivated by financial interest. Tonight had provided evidence that authentic kindness still existed, independent of money or status. "The people I met tonight were definitely real," David assured her. "They helped someone they thought was struggling, not because they expected anything in return, but because they understood what it meant to need help." As Emma returned to her homework, David retreated to his home office to process what he had experienced. The room was filled with awards, business magazines featuring his image, and reminders of his professional accomplishments. But tonight, these symbols of success felt less significant than a medical bracelet worn by a grocery store cashier who had shown extraordinary kindness to a stranger. David opened his laptop and began researching Maria Santos, though he wasn't sure exactly what he hoped to find. Public records were limited, but he discovered that she had worked at Megamart for over 15 years, starting as a part-time employee while attending community college. She had worked her way up to head cashier supervisor, demonstrating the kind of persistence and dedication that impressed David even in his business dealings. Further research revealed that Maria lived in a modest apartment complex about 20 minutes from the store. The building was older but well-maintained, the kind of place where working families established roots and built community connections. Property records showed that she had lived there for nearly a decade, suggesting stability despite what were probably ongoing financial challenges. David also found information about diabetes support groups in the area, several of which listed Maria as a volunteer coordinator. She wasn't just managing her own medical condition, she was helping others navigate similar challenges. This discovery reinforced his impression that her kindness tonight wasn't an isolated incident but part of a consistent pattern of helping others. The more David learned about Maria's life, the more impressed he became with her character. She had transformed personal challenges into opportunities to serve others, using her experience with medical expenses and retail work to provide both practical help and emotional support to people in similar situations. Her willingness to use her employee discount for a stranger made perfect sense in the context of someone who regularly prioritized others' needs. Information about Marcus and his family proved harder to find, but David's research team could probably gather more details if needed. The teenager's wisdom about passing kindness forward suggested a family that prioritized values over material success, exactly the kind of influence David hoped Emma would encounter in her own life. As the evening grew later, David found himself drafting notes about potential ways to reciprocate the kindness he had received. Traditional approaches like sending money or gifts felt wrong somehow, too much like the transactional relationships that characterized his business world. The people who had helped him tonight had given freely without expecting anything in return. Any response needed to honor that spirit of genuine generosity. One possibility was supporting the diabetes charity where Maria volunteered, providing resources that would benefit many people facing similar challenges. Another option was creating scholarship opportunities for employees like Maria who had demonstrated both professional excellence and personal character. David had the resources to make significant impacts in these areas, but he wanted to ensure that his actions enhanced rather than diminished the meaning of what had occurred. The more David thought about it, the more he realized that his test had fundamentally changed his perspective on wealth and responsibility. Tonight had shown him that real kindness came from people who understood struggle, not from those insulated by privilege. Maria's generosity was meaningful precisely because it represented personal sacrifice, not abstract charity from unlimited resources. This realization suggested that David's approach to philanthropy might need significant revision. Instead of writing large checks to distant causes, perhaps he should focus on supporting people like Maria who were already making differences in their communities. Rather than creating new programs from scratch, maybe he should amplify the work of people who understood problems from personal experience. The clock in David's office showed nearly midnight, but he wasn't ready to sleep. The evening's events continued replaying in his mind, each detail revealing new insights about human nature and community. Maria's patience with his fake card problems, Marcus's wisdom about passing kindness forward, the spontaneous collaboration of strangers to help someone in apparent need, all of it challenged David's assumptions about modern society. He thought about the businesswoman who had moved to another register rather than wait for his situation to be resolved. Her impatience contrasted sharply with the kindness of others, but it also served an important purpose in his test. The presence of less sympathetic observers made the generosity of Maria and the others more meaningful by demonstrating that kindness was a choice, not an inevitable response. David's reflection was interrupted by a soft knock on his office door. Emma appeared in the doorway, dressed in pajamas and carrying a glass of water that was part of her evening medical routine. "Dad, are you okay? You seem different tonight." Emma's perceptiveness always amazed David. Despite her youth and medical challenges, she possessed an emotional intelligence that allowed her to read people with remarkable accuracy. Tonight was no exception. She had detected the impact of his experience even though he hadn't shared the details. "I'm more than okay," David replied, gesturing for her to join him. "I'm hopeful. Tonight reminded me that there are still people in the world who choose to be kind even when it costs them something." Emma settled into the chair across from his desk, her medical bracelet catching the light from his desk lamp. The sight reminded David once again of Maria's similar bracelet and the connection it had created between them. "Tell me about them," Emma said simply. David found himself describing Maria's patience and generosity, Marcus's wisdom, and the collaborative spirit that had emerged among strangers. As he talked, he watched Emma's expression change from curiosity to wonder to something approaching joy. "They sound like the kind of people I hope to meet someday," Emma said when he finished. "People who are kind because that's who they are, not because of what they might get." "They are exactly that kind of people," David confirmed. "And tonight proved to me that they still exist, even in a world that sometimes seems to reward selfishness over kindness." Emma nodded thoughtfully, processing the story and its implications. "Do you think they would still have helped if they had known who you really are?" The question struck David as particularly insightful. It went to the heart of why he conducted these tests and what he had learned tonight. "I think Maria and Marcus would have," he replied after consideration. "Their kindness seemed to come from understanding what it means to struggle, not from judgment about who deserves help." "That's the best kind of kindness," Emma observed. "The kind that doesn't ask questions or make judgments. It just helps because help is needed." David realized that his daughter already understood lessons about generosity and character that many adults never learned. Her own medical challenges had taught her about vulnerability and the importance of compassion, giving her wisdom that complemented her natural intelligence. "What do you think I should do now?" David asked, genuinely curious about Emma's perspective. Emma considered the question seriously, her expression thoughtful. "I think you should find a way to help them that honors what they did for you. Not just giving money, but showing them that their kindness mattered and made a difference." Her suggestion aligned with David's own instincts about avoiding transactional responses to genuine generosity. The people who had helped him tonight deserved recognition that matched the spirit of their actions, not just financial compensation that might diminish the meaning of what they had done. As Emma prepared to return to her room, she paused at the doorway. "Dad, do you think you'll keep doing these tests?" David considered her question carefully. Tonight's experience had provided more insight than months of previous experiments, but it had also raised ethical questions about the deception involved. The kindness he had received felt too genuine to be built on lies, even if those lies had revealed profound truths about human nature. "I'm not sure," he replied honestly. "Tonight was special, but I'm starting to wonder if there are better ways to understand people's character without deceiving them." Emma nodded approvingly. "Good. I think real kindness deserves real honesty, don't you?" After Emma went to bed, David remained in his office for another hour, continuing to process the evening's events. The test had succeeded beyond his expectations in revealing the capacity for human goodness, but it had also challenged his methods and assumptions. Moving forward, he would need to find ways to support and encourage kindness without the ethical complications of deception. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 1 o'clock, finally prompting David to close his laptop and prepare for bed. But he knew that sleep would be elusive tonight. The images of Maria's patient smile, Marcus's wise words, and the collaborative spirit of strangers would occupy his thoughts for hours to come. As he turned off the office lights and headed upstairs, David felt a profound sense of gratitude for what he had experienced. The test had been designed to measure others, but it had ended up transforming his own understanding of kindness, community, and responsibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight had provided a foundation of hope that would influence all his future decisions. The house settled into quiet as David finally reached his bedroom, but the impact of the evening's events continued to resonate. He had witnessed something extraordinary at Megamart, something that would change not just his perspective on human nature but his approach to using his wealth and influence in the world. Maria, Marcus, and the others had given him a gift that money couldn't buy, genuine proof that kindness still flourished in unexpected places, waiting to be recognized and supported by those with the resources to make it grow. 3 days passed before David could bring himself to return to Megamart. The memory of that evening lingered in his mind like a song he couldn't stop humming, beautiful but haunting in its implications. He had spent those days consulting with his legal team, his personal assistant, and even his therapist about the ethical complexities of what he was planning to do. The kindness he had received from Maria and the others demanded a response, but it had to be the right response, one that honored their generosity without diminishing its meaning. Emma had been his most valuable advisor during these deliberations. Her perspective on authenticity and genuine kindness had helped David navigate the moral maze of revealing his deception while finding ways to meaningfully reciprocate the help he had received. She had suggested that honesty, even delayed honesty, was better than allowing the lie to persist indefinitely. On Thursday morning, David dressed carefully in a tailored navy suit that reflected his true status without being ostentatious. He chose a simple but elegant tie and his best leather shoes, wanting to look professional but approachable. The transformation from his disguise 3 days earlier was dramatic, though he wondered if Maria would even recognize him as the same person who had struggled with grocery payment. The drive to Megamart felt different this time. Instead of nervous anticipation about conducting a test, David experienced a complex mixture of excitement and anxiety about revealing the truth. He had rehearsed various approaches to the conversation, but nothing felt adequate to address the magnitude of what Maria and the others had done for him. David arrived at the store during the mid-morning lull, when the early shoppers had finished and the lunch crowd hadn't yet appeared. The parking lot was half empty, and the familiar automatic doors welcomed him with their gentle whoosh. Inside, the store looked exactly the same, but David's perception had been fundamentally altered by his previous experience. He spotted Maria almost immediately, stationed at her usual register and helping an elderly customer with a complex coupon situation. Even from a distance, David could see the same patience and kindness that had impressed him during his test. She took time to explain each discount, counted change carefully, and sent the customer away with a genuine smile that suggested she found satisfaction in providing good service. David approached slowly, suddenly unsure how to begin the conversation. What did you say to someone who had shown you extraordinary kindness based on circumstances that weren't real? How did you explain that their generosity had been a test without making them feel manipulated or foolish? Excuse me, David said when Maria finished with her customer. I was wondering if I could speak with you privately for a few minutes. It's about something that happened here a few days ago. Maria looked at him with polite confusion, clearly not recognizing him in his current appearance. I'm sorry, but do we know each other? You look familiar, but I can't quite place you. We met Tuesday evening, David explained carefully. I was having trouble with my payment, and you were incredibly kind to me. Along with several other customers who helped out. Recognition dawned slowly on Maria's face, her expression shifting from confusion to surprise to something approaching disbelief. You're the gentleman with the medication expenses? But you look so different. I know this is confusing, David said, glancing around to ensure they had some privacy. Is there somewhere we could talk? I have something important to tell you, something I should have said that night but couldn't. Maria's expression became more guarded, as if she was beginning to suspect that the situation might not have been what it appeared. She called to a colleague at the adjacent register, explaining that she needed to take a brief break, then gestured for David to follow her to a quiet corner near the customer service desk. I'm not sure what's going on here, Maria said once they were away from other customers, but I'm starting to get the feeling that Tuesday night wasn't exactly what it seemed. David took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether his revelation would be received as a positive surprise or a hurtful betrayal. You're right to be suspicious. The truth is, I wasn't really struggling financially that night. The card decline was intentional, part of something I do to test how people respond to someone who appears to need help. Maria's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: confusion, realization, hurt, and then something that might have been anger. So you were lying? About the medical expenses, about not being able to afford groceries? You were testing us like some kind of experiment? Yes, David admitted, feeling the weight of his deception more heavily than ever. And I know how that sounds, how wrong it seems. But please let me explain why, and more importantly, let me tell you what your kindness meant to me. I'm listening, Maria said, though her voice was cool and her arms were crossed defensively. But I have to say, this feels pretty manipulative. We genuinely cared about helping you, and you were just playing a role? David understood her reaction completely. If their positions were reversed, he would feel equally betrayed and used. My name is David Chen, he began. I'm the CEO of Chen Technologies, and I have more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. But I also have a 12-year-old daughter with a serious medical condition, and I've become increasingly concerned about the kind of world she's growing up in. He paused, watching Maria's expression carefully. The mention of his daughter seemed to soften her defensive posture slightly, though she remained obviously hurt and confused. I conduct these tests because I want to know if genuine kindness still exists, if people will help others without expecting anything in return. I've done this dozens of times, and usually, people either ignore someone in trouble or their help comes with conditions and judgment. But Tuesday night was different. David reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder he had prepared. Maria, what you did, what Marcus and his mother did, what all those customers did, it wasn't just customer service or ordinary charity. You saw someone struggling and you gave part of yourself to help them. You used your employee discount, your own benefit, to help a complete stranger. Maria glanced at the folder but didn't take it yet. So what happens now? Do you give us all some kind of prize for passing your test? Do you write about us in some business magazine as examples of good customer service? No, David said firmly. This isn't about recognition or publicity. This is about showing you that your kindness mattered, that it changed someone's perspective on humanity, and that I want to find a way to honor what you did without diminishing its meaning. He extended the folder toward her again. Would you please look at this? It's not what you might think. Maria hesitated for another moment, then took the folder and opened it. Inside were documents that made her eyes widen with surprise. The first page was a deed transferring ownership of her apartment building to a community trust that would ensure affordable rent for all residents in perpetuity. The second was a scholarship fund established in her name at the local community college, specifically for students managing chronic medical conditions while working toward healthcare careers. I don't understand, Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would you do this? Because Tuesday night you showed me something I was beginning to doubt existed, David replied. You showed me that kindness isn't dead, that people with their own struggles will still sacrifice to help others. You didn't help me because you expected anything in return. You helped because you understood what it felt like to need help. Maria was quiet for a long time, looking through the documents with tears forming in her eyes. This is too much, she finally said. I just did what felt right. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, Maria, they wouldn't have, David said gently. I've tested this in dozens of situations, and what happened Tuesday night was extraordinary. Most people would have processed the declined card and moved on to the next customer. Some would have been annoyed or judgmental. But you saw someone struggling and immediately started trying to find solutions. You offered your employee discount to a stranger. David sat down in a nearby chair, wanting to be at her eye level for this conversation. The scholarship fund and the apartment building trust aren't rewards for passing a test. They're investments in the kind of person you've proven yourself to be. Someone who uses personal experience with difficulty to help others facing similar challenges. But I feel like such a fool, Maria said, wiping at her eyes. I was so worried about you, about whether you could afford your medication. I even wrote down resources for food banks and assistance programs. All for someone who could probably buy the entire store. That's exactly why this matters so much, David insisted. Your concern was genuine. The resources you provided came from a real desire to help. The fact that I didn't actually need them doesn't diminish the kindness of offering them. Maria looked around the store, probably thinking about her colleagues and wondering what they would say if they knew what was happening. What about the others? Marcus and his mother, the other customers who helped? I'm planning to find ways to acknowledge their kindness too, David replied. Marcus impressed me with his wisdom about passing kindness forward. His family deserves recognition for raising someone with such strong values. This is overwhelming, Maria admitted. I need to process what you're telling me. The apartment building, the scholarship fund, these are life-changing things. And you're doing this because of one evening when I tried to help someone buy groceries? I'm doing this because that one evening proved that goodness still exists in the world, David corrected. Because you showed me that my daughter will encounter people like you as she grows up, people who will see her medical bracelet and understand what it means to face daily challenges with courage and grace. The mention of his daughter seemed to resonate with Maria. She looked down at her own medical bracelet, probably thinking about the connection David had recognized that night. Your daughter has diabetes too? She asked. No, a different condition, David replied. But similar challenges in terms of daily management and medical expenses. Watching her navigate those difficulties while maintaining such a positive attitude has made me very aware of how important it is for her to encounter genuine kindness in the world. Maria nodded with understanding. That's why you do these tests. You're trying to make sure the world will be good to her. Partly, yes. But also because I have resources that could make a difference, and I want to make sure I'm supporting the right kinds of people and initiatives. Tuesday night showed me what real kindness looks like, and now I want to find ways to encourage more of it. The scholarship fund, Maria said, looking at the documents again. Students with medical conditions pursuing healthcare careers. That's very specific. Because you understand both sides of the healthcare equation, David explained. You know what it's like to be a patient dealing with chronic conditions and medical expenses, and you've shown that you use that understanding to help others. Students who share those experiences would be uniquely qualified to provide compassionate care. Maria was quiet again, processing the implications of what David was offering. I don't know if I deserve this, she finally said. Deserve has nothing to do with it, David replied. This isn't about earning a reward. It's about recognizing and supporting someone who consistently chooses kindness even when it costs them something personal. A customer approached the customer service desk, interrupting their conversation. Maria glanced over, clearly torn between her professional responsibilities and the life-changing discussion they were having. Go help them, David said. I can wait. This conversation is important, but your job matters too. Maria handled the customer's return quickly and efficiently, but David could see that her mind was elsewhere. When she returned, she seemed to have reached some kind of internal resolution. If I accept this, she said, gesturing to the folder, what do you expect from me? What strings are attached? No strings, David replied immediately. No expectations beyond continuing to be the person you already are. The apartment trust is designed to benefit your entire community, not just you. The scholarship fund will help students you'll probably never meet pursue careers in healthcare. Neither requires anything from you personally. But why the secrecy with the test? Why not just observe how people behave naturally? David considered the question carefully. Because people behave differently when they know they're being watched, especially by someone with money. I wanted to see authentic responses to someone in apparent need, not performance kindness designed to impress a potential donor. Maria seemed to accept this explanation, though David could tell she was still processing the ethical implications of his approach. What about your daughter? Does she know about these tests? She knows about Tuesday night, and she's been helping me think through how to respond appropriately. She's the one who suggested that genuine kindness deserves genuine honesty, which is why I'm here talking to you now instead of just sending anonymous donations. I'd like to meet her someday, Maria said unexpectedly. If that would be appropriate. It sounds like she has good insights about kindness and authenticity. The request touched David deeply. I think she would enjoy meeting you too. She's always interested in meeting people who understand medical challenges and find ways to help others despite their own difficulties. Maria looked at the documents one more time, then back at David. I have one condition, she said. If I accept this, I want to be involved in selecting the scholarship recipients. I want to make sure the money goes to students who really understand what it means to struggle and who will use their education to help others. Absolutely, David agreed immediately. That's exactly the kind of involvement I was hoping you'd want. Your insight into what kinds of students would benefit most and contribute most to healthcare is invaluable. In the apartment building trust, I want to make sure my neighbors understand what's happening and why. They deserve to know that their housing security is being protected because of something positive, not because of some corporate takeover. David nodded approvingly. We can arrange a meeting with all the residents to explain the trust structure and answer any questions they might have. Transparency is important, especially when it affects people's homes. Maria closed the folder and looked directly at David. I still think what you did was ethically questionable. Deceiving people to test their character isn't something I'm comfortable with. But I also understand why you felt you needed to do it, and I can see that your intentions were good. I agree that the deception was problematic, David admitted. I'm still working through the moral implications myself. But I also know that Tuesday night showed me something important about human nature, and now I have an opportunity to support and encourage the kind of kindness you demonstrated. What about Marcus and his family? And the other customers who helped? David smiled. Marcus is going to receive a full scholarship to any college he chooses when he's ready, along with an endowment for a community service program he can design himself. His mother will receive support for any educational or professional goals she wants to pursue. The other customers will receive acknowledgments appropriate to their contributions. You've thought of everything, Maria observed. I've tried to. But mostly I've tried to listen to what Emma told me about making sure my response honors the spirit of what you all did for me. Maria stood up, indicating that she was ready to return to work but that she had made her decision. I'll accept your offer, but with the understanding that this is the beginning of a partnership, not the end of your obligation. If you're going to use your resources to support kindness, then you need to be committed to doing it right, with input from people who understand what genuine need looks like. I couldn't agree more, David replied, standing as well. I've learned more from Tuesday night and from this conversation than from months of business meetings. I need partners like you to help me use my resources wisely. As they shook hands, David felt a sense of completion that he hadn't experienced in years. The test had been successful beyond his wildest expectations, not just in revealing human kindness but in creating an opportunity for meaningful partnership with someone who embodied the values he wanted to support. There's one more thing, Maria said as they prepared to part. I want you to promise me that you'll stop these deception tests. If you want to understand how people respond to those in need, there are honest ways to do that. Volunteer at food banks, support existing charities, get involved in community organizations. You'll see just as much human nature without having to lie to people. David considered her request seriously. You're right. Tuesday night gave me what I was looking for, and now I need to find better ways to stay connected to these realities. Will you help me identify opportunities for authentic involvement? I'd be happy to, Maria replied. and I think Emma would be a good judge of whether your involvement is genuine or just another form of testing. As David left Megamart for the second time that week, he felt profoundly different than he had after his first visit. The test had succeeded in finding evidence of human kindness, but more importantly, it had created connections and opportunities that would continue long after the experiment was over. The drive home gave him time to reflect on Maria's challenge about finding honest ways to stay connected to community needs. She was right that deception wasn't necessary to understand human nature, and Emma would definitely approve of more authentic approaches to philanthropy and community involvement. When David arrived home, he found Emma in her usual spot in the family room, though today she was video chatting with friends instead of doing homework. Her face lit up when she saw him, and she quickly ended the call to hear about his conversation with Maria. "How did it go, Dad? Did you tell her the truth?" "I did," David replied, settling into the chair beside her. "And you were right about honesty being important. Maria was hurt at first that I had deceived her, but she understood why I felt I needed to do it." Emma listened intently as David described the scholarship fund, the apartment building trust, and Maria's request to be involved in making both initiatives successful. Her questions were thoughtful and practical, focusing on how the programs would actually help people rather than on the dramatic gesture of David's response. "What about her condition that you stopped doing deception tests?" Emma asked. "I agreed," David replied. "She's right that there are better ways to stay connected to community needs." She offered to help me find opportunities for authentic involvement. "Good," Emma said firmly. "I never liked the lying part of your tests, even though I understood why you felt you had to do them. This seems much better." David realized that his daughter's approval meant more to him than any business success or financial milestone. Her values and insights consistently guided him toward better decisions, and her support for this new direction confirmed that he was on the right path. "There's something else," David said. "Maria asked if she could meet you someday. She was impressed by your perspective on kindness and authenticity." Emma's eyes brightened with interest. "I'd like that. She sounds like someone who really understands what it means to help people." Over the following weeks, David worked with his legal team and Maria to implement the initiatives they had discussed. The apartment building trust was established with input from all residents, ensuring that everyone understood the protection they were receiving and why. The scholarship fund was structured to provide not just financial assistance but mentoring and support services for students managing medical conditions while pursuing healthcare careers. Maria proved to be an invaluable partner in both initiatives. Her understanding of community dynamics helped structure the apartment trust in ways that preserved residents' dignity while providing security. Her insight into the challenges faced by students with medical conditions informed the scholarship program's design, ensuring that it addressed real needs rather than assumed ones. Marcus and his family were initially overwhelmed by David's acknowledgement of their kindness, but they quickly embraced the opportunities it provided. Marcus began designing a community service program that would connect teenagers with local charities, creating a framework for young people to contribute meaningfully to their communities. His mother enrolled in nursing school, a dream she had deferred for years due to financial constraints. The other customers who had contributed to helping David that Tuesday night received acknowledgments appropriate to their situations and preferences. Some accepted financial assistance for their own challenges, others requested donations to charities they supported, and a few simply asked for letters of appreciation that they could keep as reminders that their kindness had mattered. Throughout this process, David found himself more energized and fulfilled than he had been in years. The business success that had defined his adult life suddenly felt less important than these connections with people who prioritized values over profit. Maria's challenge to find authentic ways to stay involved in community needs had opened doors he hadn't known existed. Emma played an important role in keeping David grounded throughout these developments. Her questions about sustainability, authenticity, and impact helped him avoid the philanthropic mistakes that wealthy people often made. Her insistence on meeting the people affected by his initiatives ensured that David's efforts remained connected to real human experiences rather than abstract charitable concepts. When Maria and Emma finally met, David watched two of the most important people in his life discover their shared understanding of medical challenges and the importance of genuine kindness. Their conversation covered everything from daily management of chronic conditions to the ethics of helping others, and David realized that both of them were teaching him lessons about character and community that no business school had ever offered. The transformation that began with a declined debit card in a grocery store checkout line had become something far more significant than David had ever imagined. His test to measure human kindness had evolved into a network of relationships and initiatives that would continue growing and making differences long after the original experiment was forgotten. As David reflected on the journey from that Tuesday evening to this new phase of his life, he understood that Maria had been right about the importance of authenticity. Genuine kindness deserved genuine honesty, and genuine philanthropy required genuine relationships with the communities it sought to serve. The test had ended, but the real work was just beginning. 6 months later, David stood in the gleaming conference room of Chin Technologies, but his mind wasn't on quarterly projections or market analyses. Instead, he was thinking about the community garden that Maria had suggested they establish behind her apartment building, where residents could grow fresh vegetables and children could learn about nutrition and responsibility. The transformation in his priorities had been so complete that his board members sometimes seemed confused by his shift toward community-focused initiatives. The morning's agenda included presentations on 3 new scholarship recipients from Maria's program, and David found himself more invested in these stories than in any corporate merger he had ever negotiated. Each student represented not just academic achievement but the kind of resilience and compassion that Maria had insisted were essential criteria for selection. Sarah Martinez was a 22-year-old single mother managing type 1 diabetes while pursuing a nursing degree. Her application essay had moved David to tears as she described caring for her young son while maintaining her blood sugar levels and working night shifts to pay for school. Maria had interviewed Sarah personally and reported that her motivation to become a pediatric nurse stemmed directly from her experiences navigating healthcare systems as both patient and advocate. James Thompson was a veteran dealing with PTSD and chronic pain who wanted to become a mental health counselor. His understanding of trauma and recovery, combined with his determination to help others facing similar challenges, made him exactly the kind of student the scholarship program was designed to support. Maria had noted that James's military discipline, tempered by personal vulnerability, gave him unique qualifications for helping others heal. The third recipient, Anna Kim, was a 19-year-old with cerebral palsy who dreamed of becoming a physical therapist. Her application had included videos of her working with younger children with disabilities, demonstrating both technical knowledge and intuitive understanding of how to motivate and encourage others facing physical challenges. Maria had been particularly impressed by Anna's ability to connect with patients who felt discouraged about their progress. David's assistant knocked and entered the conference room, reminding him that Emma was waiting in his office. The weekly lunch meetings he had established with his daughter had become the highlight of his work schedule, providing perspective and grounding that kept him focused on what truly mattered. Emma had grown several inches in the past 6 months, but more importantly, she had developed new confidence and maturity. Her friendship with Maria had blossomed into a mentoring relationship that benefited both of them. Maria helped Emma navigate the social challenges that came with managing a chronic medical condition, while Emma provided fresh perspectives on community needs and philanthropic strategies. "Dad," Emma said when David joined her in his office, "I've been thinking about the scholarship program, and I have an idea I want to run by you and Maria." David settled into the chair across from his daughter, always eager to hear her insights. Her suggestions invariably improved whatever initiative she was discussing, and her understanding of authentic community engagement had become invaluable to his philanthropic efforts. "What's your idea?" he asked. "I think we should add a mentorship component where scholarship recipients are paired with healthcare professionals who also have chronic medical conditions. It would give the students both career guidance and personal support from people who understand their daily challenges." The suggestion was brilliant in its simplicity and depth. Emma had identified a gap in the current program while proposing a solution that would create lasting relationships and support networks beyond financial assistance. "That's an excellent idea," David replied. "Have you discussed it with Maria?" "Actually, It was partly her suggestion, Emma admitted. She mentioned that some of the students were struggling not just with academic demands but with feeling isolated because their classmates don't understand what it's like to manage medical conditions while studying. She thought connecting them with professionals who had walked similar paths might help. David felt a familiar surge of admiration for both his daughter and Maria. Their collaboration had consistently produced ideas that were more thoughtful and effective than anything he might have developed on his own. The partnership he had hoped for when he first revealed his deception had evolved into something far more valuable than he had imagined. "We should present this to the board this afternoon," David said. "I think they'll be impressed by the thoughtfulness of the proposal." Emma shook her head. "I don't think we need board approval for everything, Dad. Sometimes the best ideas are the ones that come from people who understand the problems firsthand. Maria knows what the students need, and she has connections in the healthcare community who could serve as mentors." Her point about not over-bureaucratizing community initiatives was well taken. David had learned that some of his most successful efforts were those that operated with minimal corporate oversight, allowing people like Maria to implement solutions based on direct knowledge and relationships. "You're right," he conceded. "Let's schedule a meeting with Maria to develop the mentorship program directly. We can inform the board after we have a working model." Their lunch conversation moved on to other topics, including Emma's upcoming participation in a diabetes awareness campaign that Maria had organized. The event would bring together young people with various medical conditions to share their experiences and support each other, exactly the kind of peer connection that Emma had often said was missing from traditional medical care. "I'm nervous about speaking in public," Emma confided, "but Maria says that sharing our stories helps other people feel less alone. She thinks my perspective on managing school and social activities with medical monitoring might help younger kids who are just getting diagnosed." David felt proud of his daughter's willingness to use her experiences to help others, even when it required courage and vulnerability. Her growth over the past 6 months had been remarkable, and he attributed much of it to the positive influences she had encountered through their community involvement. After lunch, David drove to Megamart for his weekly meeting with Maria. These sessions had become essential to his understanding of community needs and effective philanthropy. Maria's insights into family dynamics, healthcare challenges, and economic realities provided context that no corporate analysis could match. He found Maria in the employee break room, reviewing applications for a new round of scholarship recipients. Her dedication to the program went far beyond what anyone could reasonably expect, but David had learned that Maria approached everything with the same thoroughness and compassion she had shown that first Tuesday evening. "How are the new applications looking?" David asked, settling into the chair across from her. "Incredible," Maria replied, looking up with excitement. "We have a young man who's been managing sickle cell disease while working toward becoming a hematologist, specifically to research better treatments for his condition. There's a woman with multiple sclerosis who wants to become an occupational therapist to help other patients maintain independence. The quality of applicants keeps improving." David listened as Maria described each candidate, noting how she emphasized not just their academic qualifications but their personal understanding of healthcare challenges and their commitment to helping others. Her selection criteria consistently identified students who would become exactly the kind of healthcare providers that patients needed most. "Emma had an interesting suggestion today," David said, and he outlined the mentorship program idea. Maria's face lit up immediately. "That's perfect. I've been worried about some of our current recipients feeling overwhelmed by the isolation that comes with managing medical conditions and demanding academic programs. Connecting them with successful professionals who understand those challenges could make all the difference." They spent the next hour developing a framework for the mentorship program, identifying potential mentors from Maria's network of healthcare professionals and establishing guidelines for matching mentors with students based on medical conditions, career interests, and personality compatibility. "I know a pediatric nurse who has type 1 diabetes," Maria said, making notes on a legal pad. "She's been managing her condition for over 20 years while building a successful career. She would be perfect for Sarah Martinez." "What about James Thompson?" David asked, referring to the veteran pursuing mental health counseling. There's a psychologist at the VA hospital who has PTSD from his own military service. He's built a practice specifically focused on helping other veterans, and I think he'd be interested in mentoring someone following a similar path. As they continued planning, David marveled at Maria's extensive network of healthcare professionals who combined personal experience with medical challenges with professional expertise. Her ability to connect people based on shared understanding was exactly what made the scholarship program so effective. "There's something else I wanted to discuss," Maria said as their meeting wound down. "The anniversary of that Tuesday night is coming up next week, and I've been thinking about how much has changed since then." David realized she was right. It had been almost exactly 1 year since his test at Megamart had set in motion the chain of events that had transformed his approach to philanthropy and community engagement. The anniversary felt significant, though he wasn't sure how to acknowledge it appropriately. "What kind of commemoration were you thinking about?" he asked. "Not a celebration, exactly," Maria replied thoughtfully. "More like a reflection on what we've learned and a commitment to continuing the work. Maybe we could invite all the scholarship recipients and their mentors for a gathering where they could share their experiences and connect with each other." The suggestion aligned perfectly with Maria's consistent focus on building relationships and community rather than simply providing financial assistance. A gathering that brought together everyone touched by the scholarship program would create networking opportunities and mutual support that could last long beyond their formal education. "I love that idea," David said. "We could hold it at the community center by your apartment building. That would keep it grounded in the neighborhood where everything started." Maria nodded approvingly. And Emma could share her perspective on managing medical conditions as a young person. Her insights about peer support and authentic community engagement would be valuable for everyone. As David drove home from his meeting with Maria, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The test that had begun with deception and manipulation had evolved into genuine relationships and sustainable community impact. The lesson wasn't just about the kindness of others, but about the importance of authentic engagement and shared responsibility for community well-being. Emma was waiting for him when he arrived home, eager to hear about the mentorship program planning. Her questions were practical and insightful, focusing on how to ensure that the mentor relationships would be meaningful rather than perfunctory. "The most important thing is matching people who really understand each other's challenges," she said. "It's not enough to just pair someone with diabetes with any healthcare professional who has diabetes. Their personalities and goals need to fit too." David was continually impressed by his daughter's understanding of relationship dynamics and community building. Her perspective had become essential to every initiative they developed, providing insight that kept their efforts focused on genuine human needs rather than abstract charitable concepts. "Maria agrees with you completely," David replied. "She's already thinking about how to match people based on personal compatibility as well as medical and career factors." The anniversary gathering took place on a warm Tuesday evening, exactly 1 year after David's original test. The community center was filled with scholarship recipients, their mentors, apartment building residents, and community members who had been touched by the various initiatives that had grown from that first encounter. Marcus had returned from his first semester of college to attend the gathering, bringing stories of the campus community service program he had established based on the model he had developed with David's support. His mother Janet spoke about her progress in nursing school and the inspiration she drew from working alongside students who understood the challenges of pursuing healthcare careers while managing personal difficulties. Sarah Martinez introduced her mentor, the pediatric nurse with type 1 diabetes, and described how their relationship had helped her manage both the academic demands of nursing school and the daily challenges of maintaining her blood sugar levels while caring for her young son. The mentorship had provided not just professional guidance but emotional support from someone who truly understood her situation. James Thompson had formed a strong connection with his mentor at the VA hospital, and together they were developing new approaches to group therapy for veterans with PTSD. Their collaboration demonstrated how the mentorship program could generate innovations in patient care that benefited entire communities. Anna Kim's relationship with her physical therapist mentor had led to a research project on adaptive equipment for children with cerebral palsy. Their work was attracting attention from medical device companies interested in developing more effective tools for pediatric physical therapy. As David listened to these stories, he realized that the impact of that Tuesday evening had multiplied far beyond anything he could have predicted. The kindness shown by Maria and the others had created ripple effects that were still spreading, touching lives and communities in ways that would continue long after the original participants were gone. Emma spoke toward the end of the gathering, sharing her perspective on managing medical conditions as a young person and the importance of finding authentic community support. Her words resonated particularly with the younger scholarship recipients, who saw in her an example of how to balance health management with academic and social goals. "The most important thing I've learned this year," Emma said, "is that kindness isn't just about helping someone in a moment of need. Real kindness creates connections that keep helping people long after the original problem is solved." Her insight captured the essence of what had developed from David's original test. The transaction that night at Megamart had lasted only minutes, but the relationships and initiatives it had spawned were creating lasting change in multiple communities. Maria closed the gathering by acknowledging everyone who had contributed to the year's successes, from the scholarship recipients who had worked so hard to achieve their goals to the mentors who had shared their time and expertise. Her words emphasized the collaborative nature of everything they had accomplished. "None of this happened because of one person's generosity," she said. "It happened because people chose to connect with each other, to share their experiences and resources, and to build something together that none of us could have created alone." As the evening ended and people began to leave, David found himself standing with Maria and Emma outside the community center. The three of them had formed an unlikely partnership that had generated more meaningful change than any corporate initiative he had ever led. "What's next?" Emma asked, looking between David and Maria. "More of the same," Maria replied with a smile. "More students who need support, more opportunities to connect people who can help each other, more chances to prove that kindness creates kindness." David realized that this was exactly the answer he had hoped to hear. The work they were doing wasn't a project with a defined endpoint but an ongoing commitment to supporting the kind of community engagement that made everyone's lives better. Over the following months, the mentorship program expanded to include not just healthcare students but young people pursuing careers in education, social work, and other service professions. The apartment building trust had inspired similar initiatives in other neighborhoods, creating a model for community-controlled affordable housing that preserved residents' dignity while providing security. The community garden had become a gathering place where residents of all ages worked together to grow food and build relationships. Children learned about nutrition and responsibility while adults shared gardening knowledge and cultural traditions. The space had evolved into exactly the kind of intergenerational community resource that strengthened neighborhood bonds. Emma continued to grow in confidence and wisdom, using her experiences with medical challenges to help other young people navigate similar difficulties. Her friendship with Maria had become a model for mentorship that crossed generational lines while respecting each person's unique perspective and experiences. For David, the transformation had been complete. His business success continued, but it no longer defined his sense of purpose or achievement. The relationships he had built through authentic community engagement provided satisfaction that no corporate milestone could match. The test that had begun with a declined debit card had revealed truths about human nature that went far beyond David's original questions about kindness and character. It had demonstrated the power of genuine connection to create lasting change, the importance of authentic engagement over charitable gestures, and the potential for individual acts of compassion to generate community-wide transformation. As David reflected on the journey from that Tuesday evening to this new phase of his life, he understood that the most valuable discoveries were often the ones you weren't looking for. He had set out to test human kindness and had ended up learning lessons about authenticity, community, and the responsibility that comes with privilege. The medical bracelet that had first connected him to Maria continued to serve as a reminder of shared vulnerability and mutual support. Every time he saw Emma adjust her bracelet or noticed Maria checking her glucose monitor, he was reminded that real strength came not from avoiding difficulty but from facing it with courage and using personal experience to help others navigate similar challenges. The story that had begun with deception had evolved into a commitment to truth, transparency, and genuine relationship building. The kindness that Maria and the others had shown had created not just gratitude but responsibility, not just appreciation but action, not just recognition but lasting change. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.